Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Monday and welcome to February. In Vancouver, it's a little bit rainy and gray out, which often is the case in the winter here, but that's okay. Spring is around the corner. I promise you. I promise you. It'll be sunny and green and flowery before you know it. Adel, you weren't here last winter, were you? Were you in Kamloops? Or were you at home?
No, in Kamloops.
You were in Kamloops? Yeah, and it's a little...
It was in March.
March you came here?
Yeah, when I arrived in Canada.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. So this is your first kind of winter here in Vancouver? Yeah. Okay, it'll get better.
But Kamloops is
But what?
terrible. Winter in Kamloops.
It's colder, hey?
Yeah.
And there's snow.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Don't worry, we're almost...
Last year, after the sun was snowing.
That's true. We had last year. Yeah, we had one or two snowy days in February, and I think the year before too. But it's okay. We're almost through it. We're gonna get there. Did everybody get a haircut this weekend? I got one on Friday, but you can barely tell, so I just won't bother showing you. Doesn't make a lot of difference. Okay, let me say hello to some people. So Blake is here. Good morning, Blake. And Shania is here. Good morning, Shania. Simrat is here. Good morning, Simrat. Abby is here. Good morning, Abby. And Ryan is here. Good morning, Ryan. And Nicole is here. Good morning, Nicole. So on Friday, we were talking about, we started talking about oppression and power, and we kind of defined stereotypes and prejudices and discrimination, right? And we used that dog example. We read an article that talked about all three of those things and a few other kind of important aspects of stereotypes and prejudice as it relates to socialization. And then we talked a little bit about people expressing their prejudicial ideas. They tend to feel more comfortable doing it when they think it's fact or when society thinks it's fact. And so I used an example of decades ago, people felt very comfortable expressing their prejudices against, say, Black Americans because people actually believed that Black Americans were inferior to white Americans. They were less smart, less hardworking, their character wasn't as good. And so they felt very comfortable expressing their prejudice because they believed it to be based in fact. And of course, we know that none of those things are true. There aren't any differences in intelligence or character or level of, good morning, hardworkingness between races, quote unquote. We'll get to that later. And so, you know, nowadays, most people, even if they hold a prejudice like that, they kind of know better than to express it in public, right? It is not socially acceptable to express those things, but people do express other prejudices that are, people are kind of less alert to the fact that they're prejudicial ideas. And so we were talking about the Cosmo cover on Friday with Tess Holliday. And we saw that Piers Morgan and others, he wasn't the only one, expressing their basically prejudice against people who are overweight, and particularly women who are overweight. And again, it's justified with fact, right? They say that, oh, I'm just concerned about this person's health, but I don't think that they are, right? Fat shaming people doesn't usually make them thinner, it just makes them unhappy. There you are, good morning. It just makes them unhappy, right? And so we said that, you know, it's hard to know what Piers Morgan's intent was in that comment, but it seems as if he is expressing his prejudice towards people who are overweight, and particularly women who are overweight. And again, that's not only his prejudice, right? There's lots of people who hold that prejudice. Right, so we talked about that, and I have a few other things to share with you, but I'd like to just kind of press pause on that, if I could, to talk about the first paper that I'm going to assign you, okay? So yeah, let's just dive into it, and then if you have questions at the end, you can certainly ask them, but we'll get into it here. So, what I'm going to ask you to do is to write what I call a micropaper. I don't know if I've made up this term or if someone else made it up earlier than me, and now I'm just plagiarizing them. It's possible that either one are true, but I like to think it's my creation, and I'm going to copyright it, and every time someone writes a micropaper, I'm going to get 25 cents. And that's how I'm going to get rich. So I've created this thing, and kind of what I want it to be is like a mini research paper. And my working theory here is that if you can write a good short paper, you can write a good long paper. It's just more work. But if you know how to do the short one, you could do the long one, right? And so if you can do this really well, then I could assign you a 30-page paper and you could do it. I would never do such a thing because that's cruel and unusual, but I could do it and you would be able to, because again, the skills are kind of the same, right? It's just more work, right? It's just more work. And so hopefully we'll be able to learn how to do these things with some skill. And then, you know, if you get to university and your prof assigns you a 12-page paper, you will not panic like I did when I first got assigned 12-page papers and thought, oh God, how am I going to do this? I've written like 2 pages in the past. And so hopefully this will be a useful skill building exercise for you in terms of your future educational career, other classes, and life, who knows. So here's what I want to see in this exercise, at least in general terms. I want you to be able to find and evaluate information. So I'm going to be asking you to find an article somewhere, okay? So probably online, because nobody reads paper books anymore. Probably online, and I'm going to ask you to find one with an argument in it, okay? So this can be a little bit trickier than you might expect sometimes, because sometimes articles are just telling us things, right? And so maybe I'll get into this a little later, but think of, you know, the evening. Does anyone watch the news on TV? Or have you watched the news on TV? At least once in your life? Okay, good. Yeah, nobody watches the news. You guys are way too young to watch the news. But if you watch the news, you will not see much argument there, right? The people who are at the desk reading the news to you, they're just telling you the who's and the what's and the why's and the when's, right? That's all they're telling you. They're not analyzing it. They're not trying to convince you of anything necessarily. They're just telling you what happened. And lots of articles that are out there are like that, especially if you pull them from a newspaper. They're just simply trying to tell you what happened. And that's no good, right? We need something that has an opinion, an argument, something that's trying to convince you of something. This happened and it's really bad because of this. Or, you know, we're really making progress in this area and here's why. Or this political leader said this or did this, and this is why this is a huge mistake, right? So we need an argument, right? We need somebody trying to convince us of something. Lots of articles out there are just information, and that's fine, but it's not going to work for what we want. We want something to sink our teeth into, right? And if there's no argument in your article, it's not going to work for you very well. So I want you to be able to find this, and I want you to be able to find it and make sure that it is a credible, legitimate source. So a source that we can believe, a source that we can trust. If you go ranging around the internet, you will find all kinds of things, right? You'll find very high quality, well-researched, well-written things. And then you'll find stuff written by people who are insane, right? So we need the tools to be able to determine what is good quality material and what is like the ravings of crazy people, right? Because we don't want to listen to those and believe those. We want to believe people who have done the research, right? People who have done their homework. So I want you to be able to find these things, and I want you to be able to tell the difference between good stuff and bad stuff. Sometimes it's very obvious. Sometimes it's a bit of a skill, right? So personally, when I read an article, there's kind of a lot going on, right? As I'm looking at their grammar, the way they phrase things, the words they choose. the things that they say, the formatting of their website, all of it, right? I look up who they are and I'm like, who is this person saying this stuff? I try to figure out if I can trust what they're saying or if it's bonkers, right? So there's a lot of things going on, but we'll get to that. I want you to be able to sort of take that information, that article that you read and understand it, right? So pull the argument out of it and understand what that person is really saying to you, what they are trying to communicate, their argument. And then I want you to be able to think critically about it. I want you to be able to assess their argument and say, okay, this author, whoever they are, they're making a good argument here. This is a logical argument. The premises support the conclusion. Premises are true. This is a good logical argument. And I agree with them for this reason. Or I don't agree with them because of this. Or I think they're missing something that they should consider. And we kind of did that with the coffee argument, right? We assessed my little coffee argument, and then we kind of said, well, is it good? Should we believe it? And some people said, yeah, it's a valid argument, but Mike, you didn't talk about this, or you missed this, or what about this, right? And so that's kind of what I want you to do, is figure out what the person is saying and then respond to it. Is this a good argument? Can you think of any things that somebody might have missed, or do you disagree with them for a particular reason? Because you certainly can, right? And then in the process of all this, I want to see that you are learning something from this course. I want to see you kind of use some vocabulary or use the sort of knowledge and things that we've learned in this class. And that's a little bit trickier to do, but I'm hoping that will come through in what you write, okay? So, right, I'm going to jump. Hey, good morning, Scotty. So let's just start with the credibility piece, okay? So anything that we read or consume, we want to make sure that they are credible. Credible means believable, right? Is this person knowledgeable? Do they legitimately know what they are talking about? Should we believe them? Do they have an ulterior motive, right? Do they have a bias or an agenda or a reason why they're telling us this thing? Is that okay, right? Is it okay? Good morning. Is it okay that they have this bias, right? Because have you talked about bias in other classes? No? Because sometimes it comes across to students when we teach them about bias that it's a bad thing, right? And so it kind of depends, right? You have to kind of know where someone is coming from, right? But maybe we'll get to that a little bit later. So how can we know that something is credible? So if you're going to look for your article, you can find it in two ways. One way, you can go through our college library, okay? So again, if you go to the Columbia College website and you click on library, you can go to the library and find materials, and you can go to databases there, all databases A to Z. At some point you have to put in your login code, but you can do that. And so when you get to here, you've got all kinds of different databases that can search out articles for you. And for the most part, if you find something through the library, it will be credible, right? All of this stuff comes from magazines, they come from journals, they come from books and things like that. So for our purposes, all of that stuff is good, and you don't have to worry too much about whether you should believe it or not. Again, you can disagree with their arguments, but it's all kind of well-researched, legitimate stuff, right? And of course, the reason it is because you can't really publish anything in a newspaper or a journal or whatever without an editor looking at it, right? So you write your piece and then you submit it to the editor, and the editor looks at it and makes sure that it is legitimate, right? Is it well researched? Is it true? Have you backed up all your claims? Is this a solid article? And if it's not, the editor's going to say no, it's no good, right? Same thing with scientific journals. If you submit an article to a scientific journal, it will go through a review process. They'll send it out to 5 or 7 other academics in the same field as you and say, hey, what do you think of this? Should we publish it? Right? And if they come back and say, yeah, it's solid, publish it, then the editor will publish it maybe. And if they all come back and say, no, this guy has no idea what he's talking about, it won't get published. So a lot of the things you find in magazines and journals are much more solid, right? Because people have looked at them, they've checked them over. Of course, on the internet, anyone can write anything they want and publish it from their basement, and it's out there, right? Nobody's checked it over, nobody's, determined whether this person is correct or not, or they're using good information, or they know what they're talking about. None of that stuff has happened, and so we have to be just a little more careful on the internet. But here in the college library, it's a controlled environment, right? And so we can be a little more comfortable that this stuff is good, okay? You can poke around with different databases. I would start with MAS Ultra. That's a pretty good one, and just see how it goes from there. You can explore other ones as well, but this is kind of the one that I think will work best for you, I think. Yeah, so when you click on that one or any of the databases, you'll get kind of a search window that looks like this, and you can put in your search terms, right? So maybe it's oppression, maybe it's sexism, maybe it's racism and Asian Americans, maybe it's discrimination and LGBTQ people, whatever you might be kind of interested in and talking about in your paper, you can feed into there, right? And just as a last tip, sometimes in the college library, I like to check off these boxes. So full text, so I can see the whole thing. And then I'll usually check off magazines and newspapers. And that will give me articles that are kind of more suitable for this class. There's kind of another level of articles that are like academic journal articles. I wouldn't go there. Most of them are quite long, like 10, 20, 30 pages. A lot of them are complex, and they're really written for other academics. They're not really written for where we are right now. So I would steer away from academic journals and look for things that are in newspapers and magazines and things, okay? And by magazines, I don't mean like People magazine. I mean like, I just thought I meant, I've gotten some strange articles. I know you're giving me the face like duh, but I've gotten some interesting stuff. So I'll check those off. Again, you can look at academic journal articles if you like, but you might find that they're a little bit more than you want to deal with in this case, and they probably are. Most people who try to, use an article like that get lost in them because they're just a little much for this level. If you want to do it, you're welcome to, but I will warn you against it. Right. So if we're in the library, we're pretty much safe. If we're out on the internet, again, it's the Wild West. It's anything goes. Anyone can publish anything. And we don't know who they are, right? They could be a very credible scholar with decades of research experience, or it could be some loon, in his mom's basement publishing this stuff, right? We need to be careful, right? We need to look carefully. So I'll kind of give you this, and this is maybe not the best tool for doing this, but I kind of feel that over time it kind of becomes a skill, like it kind of becomes second nature to look at this stuff. And maybe some of you guys do this already. If you read anything online, you kind of think about, is this a good article? Is this a good source? But there's kind of accuracy and author and currency and fairness and relevance, okay? So if you look at the first couple here, if you're looking at an article, look at accuracy, okay? So the first thing is the content grammatically correct? This sounds like a silly thing, but for lots of people, and definitely for me, not for your writing because you're students and you're still learning, but if I read something that's published and it's got like a spelling mistake or a grammatical error, immediately I'm like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, which is unfair, which is an unfair judgment, but lots of people do it. And again, if there's nobody checking your work, then it's very easy for grammatical errors and spelling mistakes to get into it, right? If you publish something in the newspaper, almost always editors go over it and make sure that it is grammatically flawless, right? So the better the grammar is and the better the spelling is, the more probably credible it is, probably, okay? Also look at the information, if the information is correct. If you know anything about the topic, try to judge if this person does know what they're talking about, right? Sometimes that's easier than others. If you're doing a social justice course and this is your first foray into social justice, it might be difficult, right? But I think we've all read stuff online, maybe in like chat forums or Reddit or something like that, and we're reading about something that we know about, like maybe a hobby or a thing we're interested in, and you can pretty quickly figure out whether the person knows what they're talking about or not, right? Right? Yeah, you know, right? You read a post and you're like, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, right? And you very quickly understand that. So try to do that, but again, it's difficult if you're working in a subject area that you don't know as much about, but do your best, right? Does it have references? Does it have sources? Not all articles are going to have this. Some of the really good ones are. They'll show you where they got their information. Lots of them won't. I wouldn't say that's a deal breaker, but academic articles will absolutely have that. Some longer, more detailed newspaper reports will have them too. Lots of them won't. For our level here, that's probably not a deal breaker, but if they have them, it's fantastic. Yeah, and tone and style and accuracy, right? So how it reads, and again, that's kind of you got to feel that out a little bit. Author. Try to figure out if there's an author. Hey, Scotty, are you with me there? Scotty, are you with me there? Scotty, are you with me there? Almost? Okay. Try to look at the author. So can you find an author, right? Do you know who wrote this? Again, if there's no author, it's not a total deal breaker, but it depends on it depends on who it is, right? So see if they have any credentials listed, right? If there's a name, great, but if it has nothing below it, how do we know who they are, right? Are they a professor of sociology at Harvard University? Awesome. Are they somebody with no professional qualifications at all? Okay, maybe we got to be more careful, but it depends. But can we figure out who this person is? And is there a name, right? The more credible it is, the easier we're going to be able to find out who wrote it and actually who they are, right? Are they someone who probably knows what they're writing about, or are they not? Yeah, okay, that's good. Currency. So is this information current and updated frequently? So this kind of depends on what you're looking for, but again, if you're writing an article on, or if you're writing on racism, let's say, you may not want to pull an article from the 1950s, right? It's not going to be very current, right? It's not going to reflect our current understanding, unless you're actually talking about what people thought in the 1950s, and then it's perfect, right? But again, pay attention to when it was published, because depending on what you're talking about, you don't want to use information that's, 20 years old without realizing it, right? You don't want to be, you don't want in your paper talking about, and this is what's happening today, and then it's like, well, actually that was 20 years ago, psst, by the way. So pay attention to when it was published, right? Usually the more recent, the better it is for what we're doing. Good morning. Usually the more recent it is, the better it is, but not always. Fairness. This is a tricky one too. Because this is a tricky one too, okay? Because we're looking for articles that have an argument, right? We're looking for articles that are trying to convince you of something, right? This is the way it is. This is what you should believe, right? That's what's in the article. And so it may not be entirely fair because it wants you to believe one side, not the other one, right? But good articles will not be so polarizing, right? And so think about some of the things you hear coming out of the United States from the Democrats and particularly from the Republicans, right? Everything the Democrats do is bad. They're all evil. They're trying to destroy the world. If you elect them, we'll have full-on communism and the end of the United States, right? Is that a fair argument? It's a little extreme, right? It's a lot of an exaggeration, right? So is it fair? No, right? So it's okay to sort of come down on one side of the issue. You don't have to, you and the author doesn't have to sit perfectly on the fence and say, oh, well, there's this side and there's this side and everybody has their own side. You don't have to do that, and the author doesn't either. The author can come down on one side or the other, but they have to treat the opposing side with some amount of fairness, right? And, suggesting, say that, if you elect Joe Biden, he will take away all your freedoms and we'll have socialism and the end of America. That's not, it's too much, right? So again, it's okay to have somebody take a side, and in fact, I'm asking you to find an article where somebody does take a side, but you got to be fair toward the other side, right? You have to say, yes, these people have an argument too. I don't happen to agree with it because of these reasons, okay? And the last part I think is a little bit self-explanatory, but relevance is what you're reading associated with what you're trying to research. So, of course it is, or otherwise you wouldn't be reading it. But I didn't make up the graphics, so here it is. I'm going to take a little pause there. How does that sound? Is this something that you've talked about in other classes? No, not at all? First time? Okay, great. It's very important. It's very important. And especially I think in this day and age, because a lot of people do not know, well, it's hard to know what to believe sometimes, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of people claiming different things. And yeah, we have to be able to figure these things out, right? And sometimes it's confusing, right? Sometimes it's difficult. So this is helpful. Yeah.
How research must be on the paper, or like the PDF or Word file?
The one you find?
Yes.
If it's on paper, it's okay. But I would, most people find things online. That's just the century we're living in. I don't expect anyone to go to a paper library and find a book. That's 100 years ago. Although, to be honest, I don't expect you to do this. Don't do it. You can't really do it now anyway. But there is something to be said for going to the library, because when you find one book on what you're looking for, you can scan the books that are around it really quickly, and sometimes you can find stuff that you didn't find in your computer search. So sometimes it's useful to actually be there and just see what's on the shelf beside it, because you never know. But yeah, it takes more time and more footwork to find your way through a real library, but we're not doing that because COVID. And it's 2021. Okay, so there's that piece, finding an article, okay? The other thing that you'll have to do is you will have to take that person's article and tell me about it in your paper, but you'll have to do it without plagiarizing, which is sometimes tricky, especially if you haven't done a lot of writing and if you haven't done a lot of writing from another source, right? So often teachers will say, respond to this, right? And you just say your thoughts. And so as long as you're not purposely telling the teacher other thoughts, most of it comes out in your own voice and it's okay, right? But it gets trickier when you're dealing with material from other sources, right? When you're dealing with stuff that you don't know about and you're going to try to communicate stuff that you just learned from this other person, but in a way that is not plagiarizing, right? So plagiarizing here is basically to steal or to pass off ideas or words of another as one's own, okay? And so it's very easy to do this by mistake. It's also very, very easy to do on purpose. But it's bad news, right? And you will get busted. You will get a 0. It'll make everyone unhappy. And it's a skill we kind of need to learn. And again, if students do this on purpose, I don't really have a lot of sympathy for you. Don't do it on purpose. But I do have sympathy when students do it by accident or because they don't know what they're doing. And I will plead guilty on this because I didn't really know anything about plagiarism either. So coming out of high school, I didn't really get taught anything about it. I didn't really get taught how to write papers. And so my first paper that I wrote at university, I think it was 8 or 9 pages on, I think it was on the Umayyad Caliphate, I think is what it was. And I wrote on it, and my prof gave me a 50, and I think he was being generous because I didn't really cite anything at all. So there was lots of plagiarism in there, but I think he recognized that this guy isn't cheating, he just doesn't know what he's doing. And so I think he gave me the 50 as a bit of a gift and said, by the way, you need to figure out what you're doing here. And so it took me a couple of years to actually figure out how to write and how to cite things. But yeah, so if you cheat on purpose, I have no sympathy for you. But if you cheat by accident, I do have sympathy for you. And so hopefully what we'll talk about here will keep you from doing that, okay? Because you don't want to do that, right? You don't want to get busted for something you didn't mean to do. So, and this is also important because, again, academics use other people's ideas all the time, okay? So most of what an academic paper is other people's ideas. And then they just add in a little bit of their own stuff, right? And so we need to know, we can use other people's ideas and info all the time. We just have to cite it properly, okay? We just have to reference it properly. And if we do, Cheyenne, if we do, then we're off the hook, right? As long as we cite it, we can say anything we want that anyone else has said. We just need to properly cite it, okay? So we need to know how to treat the words and ideas that other people have, and then we need to know how to do the citation itself, okay? So, 2 ways we can treat other people's ideas. We can paraphrase them, or we can quote them, okay? So if we directly quote them, we put the little air bunnies, right? The little quotes around it, and we use the exact words, right? We copy and paste it. We use the exact punctuation and everything, right? We pull it directly out and say, this person said this, right? The second one is much more useful and really what I'd like to see. I don't really want to see you quote anything, to be honest, but we'll get to that in a second. Paraphrasing is the way to go. So when you paraphrase, para is like parallel, right? So it's kind of beside, and phrase, right? So you're kind of saying something alongside what someone else has said. You're saying it, but in different words, in a new form, right? And when you do that, you can kind of shape someone's ideas to fit what you're trying to say, right? How your paragraph or your paper is flowing. And you can actually have it in your own voice. And you actually communicate to the professor or to whoever you're reading that I get it, right? When you can paraphrase, if I could sit down here and explain Einstein's theory of relativity to you in my own words, that would pretty much prove to you that I get it, right? But if I opened up a textbook and I read word for word from the physics textbook, would that prove to you that I understood the theory of relativity? No. It would just prove to you that I can read from a textbook about the theory of relativity, right? So paraphrasing shows that you understand it, right? And so that's what I want to see you do. I want to see you take other people's ideas and arguments, say them in your own words, and then cite them, right? So have a look at, okay, before you have a look. This is better than quoting, okay? Because, again, you don't want to quote too much, and I'll get to that in a second. Paraphrasing is helpful for helping you understand something and communicating to me that you understand it, and to others too. And so let's have a look at this here. So here's an example. There's an original passage, so this is taken from James Lester's Writing Research Papers, 2nd edition, 1976. Nice citation there. That's the original piece. And then there's a paraphrase at the bottom. And I know my head's in the way there, but hopefully it'll be okay. So I'll let you read the original one and then read the paraphrase, okay? Okay. I think that says desirable. Hang on. Oh, it is essential, sorry. Woo! Sorry. Software is fun. It's desirable to minimize. Okay. So here you can kind of see that we have an original passage from the book, from writing research papers, and we have someone who has said basically the same thing in their own words, right? It's not exactly the same words. They haven't just switched words around. They haven't thesaurused it, right? They haven't said, they haven't taken excessively and turned it into too much or something, right? They've actually rephrased it in a different way, but they've communicated the exact same thing. And they've cited it, right? So there's Lester, 4647. And so, again, think of it like, when you're on Instagram or Facebook and you don't hashtag, but you tag someone in the photo. That's kind of what you're doing here, right? You're tagging them and saying, hey, Lester, thanks for that, right? You're just giving them a little nod saying, I borrowed this from David Lester, thanks, right? And that's kind of all you're doing, right? You're paraphrasing an idea, and then you're saying, thanks. And you're good, right? There's nothing wrong with doing this at all. This is totally legit. You can do this till the cows come home, as they said a long time ago, right? But have a look at this one. Or here's a summary, okay? So you also can do summaries. And so just because someone in an article says something long doesn't mean you have to paraphrase the whole thing, right? So here again, it's the same passage. It's the same thing we just read. But here's a summary, right? And it's very short. Students should just take a few notes in direct quotation from sources to help minimize the amount of quoted material in a research paper. And again, that's pretty much what Lester said, right? That's the point of what he's trying to say, but it's just shorter, right? So there's something to be said there for just because someone has a long-winded point doesn't mean you have to paraphrase the entire thing. You might just, give me the punchline, right? Give me the point of the whole thing. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to use everything from any source, right? So for this article, you only have one article. But often when you're writing a research paper, you'll have a lot of sources. But it doesn't mean that you have to take everything from those sources and put them into your paper. Sometimes you might just borrow one thing, right? Sometimes it might just be the conclusion of the argument, right? Lester says this, blah, 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 and then move on, right? So you can kind of take bits of information and put them together to serve your purpose, right? To help you say what you're trying to say. And every time you borrow ideas from someone else, thanks, Lester, right? Just a little quick tip of the hat, if you will. Oh yeah, so I'm just gonna move my head up here. Woo! I'm just kidding. So here's a plagiarized version, okay? So again, the same passage on the top that we've been reading. Have a read of the bottom one. See what's going on there? Samesies, right? Yeah, same thing, same sentences, same word order. They've just switched out a few things, right? Instead of frequently, they use often. Instead of overuse, too many. Resulting instead of result. So you can see what they've done, right? They've copied and pasted, and then they've just written over top of it. No good, right? That's not different enough. You're just kind of, yeah, that's still plagiarism. So you've got to read something, and then you've got to put it in your own words, right? This is no good. What's that?
He didn't borrow from it. Source.
What's that?
There's no author and page name
Oh, that's true too. Yeah, there is no citation, right? There's no citation like there was in this one, right? Here there was Leicester 46-47. In this one, there's nothing, right? So there's two things. That's actually a good point, Scotty. Thank you. There's two things wrong here. Number one, it's just not different enough, right? It's the same thing, thesaurist, if that's not a word, but I'm making it a word. It's thesaurist, right? And the second one is that, like Scotty points out, there's no citation here, right? So even if the citation was there, this would still be kind of plagiarized, right? It's not your own words, it's not different enough, okay? So you have to be able to read something, understand what the person is saying, and then be able to put that into your own words, right? That's the important thing. And again, if you can do that, number one, it will show people and teachers that you understand what is being said in the article. And second, it helps you stay in your own voice, okay? And that's where I'll get to with the quoting, okay? So quoting, we've probably all seen it, we've probably all done it, right? You've quoted things in writing. The air bunnies, yeah. So here again is a quote. Let me tell you, my fellow countrymen, that all the signs point this way, that the 20th century shall be the century of Canada and Canadian development. For the next 100 years, Canada shall be the star toward which all men who love progress and freedom shall come. And that's our Prime Minister Wilfrid Laurier in a speech at Massey Hall in 1904. So here we have a direct quotation, right? And so these are easy not to plagiarize because, again, you're not saying they're your words at all, right? You're saying this is exactly what Sir Wilfrid Laurier said on that date in Massey Hall, right? But I'm going to encourage you not to quote, okay? And for two reasons. Number one, most of the time you don't need to, okay? You really only need to quote when you really need to hear the exact words that someone said, when the exact words are important, right? So here a prime minister is giving a speech, and if we use this in an article, we might need to know exactly what the prime minister said, word for word, right? Donald Trump's tweets get quoted all the time because, again, especially on Twitter, every word is important because you've only got, do you have 140 characters or is there more now? 140? Yeah, you only have 140 characters. So every letter is super important, right? And so you'll see those quoted a lot. But for our purposes, A, most of what we deal with does not need to be directly quoted. B, it doesn't really tell me anything about your understanding if you directly quote something. It just tells me that you can copy something from one place and put it into your paper, which I'm pretty sure you can all do that right now. And third, and probably maybe most important, I think it takes away from your voice, okay? So it's almost like when you're writing, you're telling me something, right? So you're like, okay, Daniel, I'm going to tell you something, blah, blah, blah. I'm explaining something to you, blah, blah, blah. And then there's this voice that comes in out of nowhere and says, blah, 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 and then it leaves again. And then it's blah, blah, blah. So it kind of like comes in out of nowhere, and then it leaves, and it doesn't really help what I'm trying to say. And again, if you're really good with your quoting, then you can make it work. But forgive me for saying this, but most students aren't that good with it, and so it doesn't work. It just feels like it's stuck in there as a bit of a space filler, right, Cheyenne? It's stuck in there as a bit of a space filler, and it doesn't work. And so I hear your voice, I hear what you're trying to tell me, I'm reading it, and then there's this voice from somewhere else that isn't connected to what's going on, and then the voice leaves, and then you try to continue. And so I would say that the quoting just gets in the way of what you're trying to say. So I wouldn't do it. I don't find it helps papers very much usually. It usually just gets in the way and you trip over it. And so I would say, paraphrase it and stay in your own voice, right? And again, there's very few instances where you really need to hear exactly what a person said word for word. The only exception I might say is maybe like really significant stuff, right? Like, if you were writing an article on racism and you were talking about George Floyd, right? So George Floyd's kind of final words, sadly, were, "I can't breathe," right? That's pretty powerful, right? And that's something you would need to quote, right? If you wanted to talk about him, because they're 3 words, but boy, do they ever hit hard, right? Paraphrasing his last words do not carry the same weight, right? George Floyd communicated to officers that he was having an obstruction of his airway, right? It's not the same, right? That doesn't work, right? "I can't breathe" feels heavy, right? It's like, holy cow, right? So again, there's very few instances where you really need to quote, but that might be one of them, right? Because the words really matter there. But in a lot of cases, they won't. They won't matter that much. So I would say don't, if you don't quote at all, it's probably for the best, right? Or maybe once if it really needs it, right? But usually it doesn't. Okay? Paraphrasing is the way to go. And then, you can just, you can keep talking using other people's information and ideas, and your whole paper is not quotes. If your whole paper is quotes, then you haven't said anything, and then there's nothing for me to mark, right? I need to mark you, not a bunch of quotes from somewhere else. That doesn't help me, or you, as it turns out. Right. So I would say don't quote. It interrupts your flow. It interrupts your voice. Sources should be quoted only if you really need them. And so again, think about George Floyd as an example. That's a case where those words need to be heard, right? In many cases, most words aren't quite that significant, and so you can probably get away with not doing it, okay? In terms of citations, that part I'm going to leave to you, okay? And so citations come in 2 places. They come at the end of your paper, where you tell me what articles, well, in this case it's just one, but in a bigger paper, what articles or sources that were used to make this paper. It's the list of ingredients, if you will. And then you also do it in text, right? And so in-text citations are just like, well, let's go back here to Lester, the one that we pointed out. Yeah, so Lester 4647. So that would appear in your paper in the middle so that I know where the idea or the information comes from. And then at the end, you give me the ingredient list, right? You tell me what goes into this paper. How much flour, how much sugar, how much salt, not how much, but tell me all the ingredients that go into this, right? And again, if you look at an academic paper, you'll usually find 2 pages of ingredients. So again, academics are doing their own original work, but they're also using a lot of other people's as well. And that's okay to do, again, as long as you cite it like this, right? As long as you tell people where the information is coming from, then you're good. They can't touch you, right? So again, if you do these things, you're fine. If you botch them a little bit, that's okay. It's a learning process. If you don't do them at all, then you're kind of veering into plagiarism, and you don't want to do that, right? So yeah, that's what I'll say about sources. So what's my next slide? Oh yeah, good. Okay. Do you have any questions right now that are sort of coming to mind that you would like to ask? A template? Yes, and I will outline one after our break, if that works for you. Is that okay? Other questions before we take 10? Going once? Going twice? Okay, break time. Okay, take a break. Come back in 10 minutes and we'll talk about just a little more about how we might do this, okay? Okay, we are, oh, I'm still up in the corner. Do you think up in the corner is better or down in the bottom is better? You think up is better? Okay. Let me center myself there. Okay, let's try that. Keep me out of the way. So, can I point? Oh, I got to point down this way. If I want to point at something, I got to go down there. Okay. Interesting. So we've been talking a little bit about credibility. We've been talking a little bit about plagiarizing and quoting, and I basically said don't quote. It's not really, it doesn't really add anything usually, unless they're powerful words that need to be heard, right? So just to talk about this and to get a little bit of experience doing it, I'd like us to read a very short article, and I think it's a page long, maybe a little bit more, okay? And oh, now I'm blocking the title. Anyway, there's no good place for me. Come on, guys, let's go. Chop, chop. What I want to do with this article is read it and kind of go through the process that we would go through in your paper. So we're not actually going to find it. Let's go, come on, come on, come on, come on. So we're not actually going to find this article because of course I've already found it, but we are going to read it and determine what the argument is. And then again, how do we respond to this argument? Do we agree or do we disagree? Okay. Again, it's a very short article. It's about a page or so, and it has to do with artificial intelligence. So the role artificial intelligence plays in the criminal justice system. Okay. The article. What's my next slide? Oh, I don't have a next slide. Okay. The article is written by. Well, let me just. I won't show it to you. Okay. Okay, the article is, I've pulled it from the Globe and Mail, maybe about 2 or 3 years ago, so it's reasonably current. The Globe and Mail is a trusted national publication here in Canada. They write all across Canada. They're very well respected and well read. They're legit, right? They're credible. The author of this piece is actually a guy named David Butt. Your laugh here, ha ha ha. Sorry, David, but. So David Butt. David Butt is a lawyer, right? So David Butt has experience in the criminal justice system, which is good, and he's probably a credible source on his own, right? He has a law degree, so that's something at least, right? So here we probably have a credible writer, a credible author. His article is published in the Globe and Mail, which is a credible newspaper. And he's going to have an argument too, right? So he's kind of asking a question with the title, should artificial intelligence play a role in the criminal justice? Oh, in criminal justice, sorry. Should it play a role in criminal justice? And of course, he's going to have an answer for us, right? He's going to try and convince us of something. And again, I wanted to read this article just to kind of experience pulling the argument from an article like this, and also because David does a good job of laying his argument out because he's a lawyer, and that's what lawyers do, build arguments, right? Or tear apart other ones. So he's kind of good at this sort of thing, and he does a pretty good job in his article here. So what I'd like you to do is just give you some time to read over this article. Like I said, it's very short, and what we want to do is pull the argument out of it. So what's the conclusion? What does David want us to believe? And what are his premises? What reasons does he use to support this conclusion? Okay? And then we'll kind of figure out how to respond to it. But first, let's figure out what David's trying to say. Okay? So as always, the article is in Microsoft Teams under Files, and then Readings and Questions is where it is. And so I'll give you, I don't know, 12 minutes or so to read. It's not a long one. If you have some questions about vocabulary, just shout it out and let me know, and I'll respond to it, because there might be some things that there might be some words you don't know. And then we'll talk about what the argument is, okay? So I'll just put maybe 12 minutes on the clock, and we'll see how that goes. So Microsoft Teams, files, readings and questions, and should artificial intelligence play a role in criminal justice? Okay, one more minute. Alrighty, Roo. So, here's David's article, right? Short, to the point, no fat, pretty much says exactly what he's thinking. And so, he has an argument to present to us. He has something he wants to convince us of. And so, what are some thoughts about what the conclusion of that argument is? What does he want us, what's the thing he wants us to take away from this?
AI should play a role in the criminal justice system only if it's publicly funded.
AI, so artificial intelligence, should play a role in public justice, in the criminal justice system, but only if it is publicly funded. So what does that mean, publicly funded?
The government?
Yeah, the government, right? Taxpayer dollars are used to create this, right? Okay. If that's his conclusion, then why should we believe that? What's one premise? We should use AI and it should be publicly funded.
It's cheaper
Then,
than psychiatrists.
right, so AI or algorithms to figure out, to make risk assessments are far cheaper than paying a forensic psychologist $500 an hour to do all of the math, right? It's a far cheaper option. It's probably a much quicker option as well, right? But he doesn't mention that. That's true. This is far cheaper. What else? Why else should we use AI, but only if it's publicly funded?
It takes away, if it's not publicly funded, it takes away the independence aspect of criminal justice.
Okay, if it's not publicly funded, it takes away the independent aspect of criminal justice. And why is that?
Because like the process of how the AI determines the risk is not disclosed because the company wants to make money.
Right. So we should only use AI if it's publicly funded, or we should use AI, but only if it's publicly funded, because privately developed AI is proprietary, right? It's a secret, right? We don't know how it works. We don't know what the coding is. We don't know what the programming is. We don't know how it's weighing certain factors. And so can the defense attorney get up there and challenge it under cross-examination like they do in all those law movies and law shows? No. We type in everything and it spits out a number, right? Eric Loomis is 60% likely to commit another crime. How did it get that? Who knows, right? All we know is it's 60%. And so, yeah, we should only use AI if it is public, or if it is publicly funded, because privately funded AI cannot be cross-examined. It can't be challenged. We don't know how it works. What else? There might be some other premises in there that are not quite, they're a little more on the implied side, but we could state them as well. We should use AI in criminal justice, but only if it's publicly funded, because it's cheaper, probably saves time, because we can cross-examine it on the stand. And there might be another one too. Actually, I really like, Mulder, I really liked how you phrased the conclusion of this, because it makes it a lot clearer. It could have been phrased differently and it would have muddied the waters a little bit, but that worked out really well. This one's kind of an implied one, and he kind of talks about it toward the end. Where is it? I think it's the beginning of the second last paragraph. There's probably an implied premise there. What do you think? Read me that first sentence. Somebody read me that first sentence from the second last paragraph. Okay, Nasra.
Introducing AI into the justice sector appears to present a collision of two legitimate value sets: the commercial imperative of secrecy and return on investment, and the justice imperative of openness and due process.
Right. So he's saying that, are we stuck with one or the other? Right? Is this a choice between two alternatives and that's it? Do we have to either give in to market capitalism, or do we have to forget all that to preserve the criminal justice system? And he's saying, no, this isn't an either or choice. We can actually, there's a third alternative, right? And the alternative is that we can do it ourselves. So I kind of feel like his premise is that both of these things are important, but we don't have to make that choice. Right? We can do something that respects both sides, right? And so, again, that's a trickier one, right? It's a little more implied, but I think one of the things that the conclusion is that we should use AI in criminal justice if it's publicly funded, because we don't have to make the choice of one or the other, right? There's a third option, there's a middle ground here that maybe it wasn't clear before. So there's kind of an implied premise there that I just thought I would point out. So I would like to talk about what to sort of say about this argument, but maybe what we'll do is we'll press pause, we'll return to this article tomorrow, and I will review the quiz, because Mulder reminded me and I asked him to, and he did. So let's just review the quiz quickly from, was it last Monday? Is that what it was? Okay, last Monday. Okay, so let me call it up here. So not that one. Oh, right, no, that one, because it's here. Yes. Okay. So this was our quiz from last week. And so we'll go over this really quickly, okay? So the first one, I know it was a tricky one, probably for lots of people, definitely for lots of people. Two things that we should remember about critical theory. Give me one. You might have to remind me the other one, actually. I think I'm forgetting. The first one, I think, was that we need to recognize that look on your face like, yeah, so tell me what it is, right? Give me the... One of them, I think, was, you're going to have to honestly remind me of the second one. One of them was that we need to understand that information has meaning, right? So facts aren't just facts. They are connected to social and political structures in society, information, facts have other meanings attached to them. And I think the second one was that sometimes knowledge is, I think the second one was this, sometimes knowledge is counterintuitive, right? Sometimes the things that we think seem to be true are actually not true. Okay? I think that's what they were, I hope. The second one, of course, is what is socialization? And so I think the official definition, what was the official definition? Some of you remembered it word for word. What was socialization? Nobody wants to tell me? It's the process of sorry? The process of acquiring culture, that's a piece of it. I'd like a little more than that, but you're not wrong. You're not wrong.
Is it the process of learning the social belief system and values in order to be accepted into a society?
Yeah. So I think what we said in the slides was that it's the process of us being sort of trained or learning the norms and beliefs and values of that our society holds, right? And I forget the exact words that the slide used. If you memorized the exact words and wrote that, fantastic. I can't fault you for that. If you said basically the same thing in other words, and if you paraphrased, also good, right? And so the kind of closer you were able to come to that definition, either with the exact words or with your own words, I gave you some marks, and if parts were missing, I kind of gave you part marks for that one, okay? But yeah, so it's the training or the learning or the being taught of social values and norms within a culture, right? Here for number 3, we said that it was the Seinfeld clip where George double-dipped his chip, and then Timmy, the other guest, was upset. Why did Timmy say something about George's action?
I have an issue with this question because I answered both of them and I only get one mark.
Oh, okay. Here's what I was looking for. Maybe this will answer your question, maybe not. What I wanted you to say is that Timmy was upset because George did what? Yeah, he double dipped, but what is that in kind of sociological terms?
He put his salad into sauce.
Literally he did, but what? Yeah, he violated a social norm, right? And that's what all of those little Seinfeld clips were about. They were about people violating social norms, wearing the same dress, eating candy bars in a bizarre fashion, or double dipping the chip. You're breaking a social rule. You're violating a social norm. And what does Timmy try to do? In a literal sense, he tries to tackle him and stop him. But in a more general sense? Yeah, there's a sanction, there's a punishment, right? Timmy tries to get George to follow the rule. He's like, the first thing he does is like, hey, you double dipped a chip, and there's funny dialogue, but really what he's saying is, you violated a social norm here. Don't do that. That's not allowed, right? And of course, we know George basically says he doesn't care. He's going to do what he wants. And then Timmy physically tries to stop him. But again, the social norm is violated, and then others try to correct people, right? We try to get people to follow the rules somehow. And again, with George and the chip, Timmy tells George very clearly, and then he tries to tackle him. But in real life, we do other things, right? We kind of give people a strange look, or we might say, what are you talking about? Or we might directly confront them, or maybe we might keep our distance, or we do all kinds of things to get people to follow social rules. And so here, it's about a chip, but it's not always about a chip, right? It's about all kinds of things. What does it mean to recognize your own social positionality? And how does your positionality influence your perspective? What did you tell me for this? What's understanding your positionality?
Where you stand influences what you see.
Yeah, where you stand determines where you see. And what does that mean, where you stand? Like, I don't mean on the street or in a building or, on the beach. What do we mean, where you stand?
Your identity in relation to others in society.
Your identity in relation to others in society. In particular, the social groups that you belong to, right? Your gender, your sexuality, your race or ethnicity, your socioeconomic class, citizenship status, your age, all of these things play into that. So again, where you stand influences what you see, but I also want to know that you understand what that means, right? I don't mean physically standing somewhere, I mean metaphorically, socially, if you will. And then the last thing, what are social norms? I think this was an easy one, but what are social norms?
Can we talk about question 4 again? Because I wrote down exactly what you said. I only got one.
Okay. I was definitely looking for you to say something about the social groups you belong to determine where you are and what you see in society, right? Those are, your positionality is kind of informed by the social groups you belong to. And the other piece I think I was looking for is that not only does it influence what you see, but it also influences how society reacts to you and treats you, okay? So again, if you're walking down the street and you're a 6'7" muscular guy, you're going to be treated a little differently than if you're maybe an old woman walking down the street, right? Those are two very different kind of identities, and society will respond to you a little bit differently, okay? So there's kind of two pieces to that, or there's a few pieces to that. Your social identity, that determines how you see society, and it also determines how society sees you and reacts to you. Cool? Okay. And social norms. What are social norms? They are, I think this is a pretty quick and easy one. They are the, what are they? The sort of standards for behavior, right? Standards for behavior that we have in a certain society or in a certain culture, right? Little rules of behavior. Some of them are formal, like laws. Some of them are informal, like, if you shake hands with someone, how long should the handshake go on? I think we can all agree 2, maybe 3 seconds is good. 25 seconds is inappropriate, right? We can all agree on that. So social norms have to do with standards of behavior, rules of behavior for people. The formal or informal thing you didn't have to mention, but that's, I think, what I was looking for, if I recall. Okay, so that's all the time we have. I'm going to end it here. Tomorrow we will return to that article and just kind of tie up the loose ends. I'll talk a little bit more about your assignment. If you want to look at your assignment, it's going to pop up in Microsoft Teams under assignments in 20 minutes. Okay, see you guys.